In the misty backwoods of 1798 Kentucky, a family ran a farm unlike any other. The neighbors whispered of strange disappearances, shadows in the cornfields, and chilling screams that echoed in the dead of night. Beneath the veneer of normalcy, the Reeds cultivated a dark hunger, hidden behind smiling faces and a picturesque homestead. Every traveler who crossed their threshold vanished without a trace, leaving behind only cryptic signs of their last moments. Whispers of secret rooms, locked chains, and forbidden rituals spread like wildfire among the locals, but no one dared to confront the Reeds. As the story unfolds, we follow a young outsider drawn to the farm by fate, slowly uncovering the horrors and secrets that bind the family together in blood and darkness. A web of fear, obsession, and twisted family loyalty awaits. Disclaimer: this story is purely fictional. Any resemblance to real events or people is coincidental. Chapter 1. Shadows on the Kentucky Horizon. The sun dipped low over the rolling hills of Kentucky, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. Smoke from distant chimneys mingled with the morning mist, giving the countryside an eerie, dreamlike quality. Few outsiders dared venture past the dusty, winding roads, but those who did spoke of a farm nestled deep in the woods, a farm that the locals only whispered about after dark. The Reeds were the kind of family that seemed ordinary at first glance. Tall, lean, weathered by hard work on their sprawling homestead, they smiled politely when neighbors passed by. But there was something about the way the children's eyes glinted in the shadows, too knowing for their years, and the way the adults' laughter carried an odd, hollow echo. Visitors often left the farm with a sense of unease, as if invisible eyes followed their every step. Jacob, a young man from a nearby town, had heard the rumors. He had always dismissed them as small-town superstition, until he stumbled upon the farm one late afternoon. Curiosity had drawn him through the thickets, guided by the scent of freshly turned earth and the distant clucking of chickens. The front yard looked harmless enough. A weathered wagon wheel leaned against the barn, a scarecrow stood rigid in the field, and the wind whispered through the corn like a faint lullaby. Yet as he stepped closer, he noticed things that didn't belong. The barn door hung slightly ajar, though no one was around to open it. Strange marks etched into the wooden fence, scratches, almost clawed, not made by animals, and behind the farmhouse, a low, guttural sound that made Jacob freeze. It wasn't quite human, not quite animal, just wrong. He wanted to leave, to run back to the safety of the main road, but something tugged at him, a mixture of fear and fascination he could not resist. Every instinct screamed for him to turn around, yet his feet carried him forward across the threshold of a farm that would change everything he thought he knew about the world. Inside the house, the smell hit him first. A blend of damp wood, iron, and something darker, almost metallic, that made his stomach twist. Shadows pooled in corners, moving in ways the light couldn't explain. And from somewhere above, a soft hum began, low and rhythmic, like a lullaby sung in a language long forgotten. Jacob's heart pounded. He knew instinctively that this farm was alive, not in the way a home is, but alive in a way that had its own rules, its own hunger. And the Reeds, he realized, were at the center of it. Next, we discover the secrets hidden in the attic, where the walls themselves seem to whisper. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Attic. The staircase creaked under Jacob's weight, each step echoing in the silent house like a warning. Dust motes floated lazily in the fading light, streaming through grimy windows, catching the last of the sun in a dull, amber glow. The smell grew stronger here, damp wood mixed with something sharp, metallic, and yet faintly sweet, an odor that seemed to burrow under his skin. At the top of the stairs, the attic door loomed. Its paint was chipped, peeling like dead skin, and the keyhole gaped like a dark, unblinking eye. Jacob hesitated, his hand hovering over the rusted knob. He had no idea what compelled him to enter, fear, curiosity, or a combination that blurred the line between the two. Slowly, almost reverently, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. The attic was narrow and low, filled with shadows that shifted unnaturally. Old furniture was stacked haphazardly, covered with yellowed sheets that seemed to whisper when brushed against. Jacob's gaze was drawn to the far corner, where a small chest sat oddly in the center of the floor, as if placed there deliberately. Its surface was scratched and worn, etched with symbols he didn't recognize. He knelt and ran his fingers over the carvings. They were cold, almost alive, pulsing faintly under his touch. The air thickened, and a whisper drifted across the room, soft and teasing, just beyond comprehension. Jacob froze. The sound was not from outside, nor from the wind. It came from the very walls, the floor, as though the house itself was speaking. A sudden movement caught his eye. A shadow darted across the far wall, quick and fluid, leaving no source behind. Jacob's pulse raced, but something deeper, an unexplainable need, drew him closer to the chest. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay objects that made his stomach churn, a bundle of letters tied with faded red ribbon, and a small, carved figure, grotesque in detail, its features eerily human, yet disturbingly wrong. As he picked up a letter, he noticed the handwriting, tight, deliberate, obsessive. The words within spoke of rituals, of keeping the family whole at any cost, of punishments for those who failed to obey. Jacob's mind struggled to process the meaning, the weight of it pressing down on him. And somewhere in the attic, from the shadows above, a soft, low hum began again, growing louder, more insistent. He realized then that he was not alone. The house was watching, waiting, hungry for secrets. And the reeds were always closer than he thought. Next, we discover the hidden passage behind the attic wall, where the darkest family secrets lie in plain sight. Chapter 3. The Hidden Passage. Jacob's hands trembled as he traced the edges of the attic wall, the letters and carved figure forgotten for the moment. Something about the planks felt different, cooler, smoother, almost alive under his fingertips. He pressed against a seam, and the panel gave way with a quiet click, revealing a narrow, dark passageway that descended into the unknown. The smell hit him first, damp earth, mold, and something sharper, almost metallic. It crawled up his nose and made his stomach knot. The passage was barely wide enough to squeeze through, the walls slick with age and something unidentifiable. He paused for a moment, listening. Only silence answered, until a soft scuffle echoed from below, as if something moved in the shadows, just out of reach. With every step downward, the air grew heavier, thick and almost suffocating. Jacob's torch flickered, casting trembling light that made the walls seem alive, shapes shifting, slithering, and disappearing when looked at directly. The passage smelled of secrets and despair, and Jacob felt a strange pull, a whispering tug that urged him forward. At the end of the corridor, the passage opened into a hidden chamber. The room was small, lined with shelves filled with jars of strange contents, preserved herbs, insects pinned under glass, and objects that made his skin crawl, small bones, twisted masks, and bundles of hair tied with colored threads. In the center of the room, a circle was etched into the dirt floor, symbols drawn with a precision that was almost ritualistic. Jacob stepped closer. A sudden draft carried a faint whisper, speaking a language he didn't know but understood on some primal level, warnings, threats, and promises all at once. He realized that the Reeds had not just lived on this farm, they had built it as a sanctuary, a laboratory of obsession, a cage for those who strayed too close. See. A sudden noise behind him made Jacob spin around. The passage had collapsed slightly, blocking the way back. Panic surged, but curiosity rooted him to the spot. The chamber was alive with secrets, and the Reeds' influence seemed to hang in the air, invisible but oppressive. Something moved in the corner of the room, too fast to see, too deliberate to be a trick of the light. Jacob understood, with a cold certainty, that the Reeds' power was not only in their hands or tools, it was in the very walls, in the soil, in the shadows that clung to every corner of the farm. And the deeper he went, the more entwined he became in a world that promised madness as easily as it promised discovery. Next, We discover the chilling truth behind the jars on the shelves and the family's forbidden experiments. Chapter 4. The Chamber of Secrets. Jacob's torch quivered in his hand as he stepped further into the hidden chamber. The shelves lining the walls seemed endless, stacked with jars filled with unidentifiable substances, murky liquids, dried herbs, and small skeletal remains meticulously labeled with strange symbols. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay, and Jacob felt as though the walls themselves were breathing around him. He picked up one of the jars. Inside floated a tiny, perfectly preserved bird, its eyes unnervingly lifelike, staring into the darkness with a vacant, accusing gaze. Next to it, a bundle of human hair tied with crimson thread sent a shiver down his spine. A tattered notebook lay on a shelf nearby. Hesitating, Jacob opened it. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, diagrams, and cryptic notes that detailed rituals, experiments, and what the author described as keeping the family whole. As he read, a horrifying picture began to form. The Reeds had long been obsessed with controlling life and death, twisting nature to suit their desires. They had conducted secret experiments in the dead of night, capturing and transforming those who wandered too close to the farm. Each entry hinted at punishments for disobedience and rewards for loyalty, but the line between the two was blurred in grotesque ways. Jacob's breath caught when he noticed a pattern. Names of missing travelers, townspeople, even children, all accounted for in these journals. Symbols next to each name marked the stage of their fate, and many ended with ominous shorthand that suggested something far darker than mere captivity. He realized with growing dread that the Reeds' farm was a living trap, each corner, each shadow, a part of their sinister design. A faint scratching echoed from the far corner of the chamber. Jacob spun around, heart hammering. A shadow moved, Ed, subtle but deliberate. He could almost feel eyes on him, watching, judging, waiting. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against his chest, whispering threats he couldn't fully understand, but felt deep in his bones. As he backed toward the hidden passage, Jacob's foot nudged a small trap-door partially concealed beneath the dirt. It creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase that descended further, into darkness that smelled even sharper, heavier. A sense of inevitability gripped him. Every step deeper was a step into madness, but Jacob could not turn away. Some force, curiosity, fear, or something older, pulled him forward. Next, we discover the horrifying truth hidden beneath the farm, where the Reeds' darkest secrets are buried alive. Chapter 5. Beneath the Soil. The spiral staircase groaned under Jacob's weight as he descended into the darkness below the farm. The air grew colder, heavier, and the smell stronger. Damp earth mingled with iron, a metallic tang that made his stomach churn. Shadows clung to the walls, stretching unnaturally as if alive, breathing with him. Every instinct screamed for him to turn back, yet some invisible thread pulled him forward. At the bottom, he emerged into a cavernous underground chamber, carved directly into the soil. The walls were slick with moisture, and the flickering torchlight revealed faint markings etched deep into the stone. Symbols, crude sketches of human figures, and a series of strange sigils that seemed almost ritualistic. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the cavern, mixing with a low, almost musical hum that seemed to vibrate inside Jacob's chest. The room was arranged with disturbing precision. Wooden tables, darkened with age, and what Jacob didn't dare think about, lined the center. Leather straps and rusted tools hung from hooks, and jars similar to those in the attic were scattered across the floor. Some contained bones, others unidentifiable organic matter suspended in murky liquid. But it was the cages along the far wall that made Jacob stagger back, his heart hammering. Inside them were remnants of lives interrupted, some curled in fear, some empty, as if their essence had been drained, leaving only a husk. Jacob's stomach churned, but he couldn't look away. A notebook lay open on a table, detailing measurements, observations, and instructions in the meticulous hand of someone obsessed. He realized with cold certainty that the Reeds' experiments were not just about cruelty. They were about control, transformation, and obsession with perfection. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. A shadow shifted near the cages, and Jacob froze. A figure, one of the Reed children, stepped from the darkness. Their eyes were unnervingly sharp, unblinking, and held a knowledge far beyond their age. They whispered a single word, almost a warning: leave. But Jacob couldn't. Fear and fascination warred in his chest, compelling him to explore further. Each step revealed new horrors, symbols etched in the soil beneath his feet, remnants of rituals, and the unmistakable presence of someone, or something, watching from the shadows. The deeper he went, the more he understood that this farm was a living organism, with the Reeds at its heart. And every secret uncovered brought him closer to a truth that might shatter not only his mind, but his very sense of reality. Next, we discover the terrifying purpose behind the underground chamber and the family's obsession with perfection. Chapter 6. Rituals of the Forgotten. The underground chamber seemed alive, each shadow stretching and writhing as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Jacob's torch flickered, casting brief glimpses of cages, jars, and symbols etched in the damp stone. Every step forward made the air heavier, pressing against his lungs like the walls themselves were closing in. At the center of the room was a raised platform, darkened with age and stains Jacob couldn't identify. Around it, intricate carvings ran along the floor, forming concentric circles and strange sigils that seemed almost to pulse under his gaze. He realized with a shiver that these were not merely decorations, they were tools of focus, designed to channel the Reeds' rituals, whatever dark magic or obsession they practiced. Jacob's eyes fell on a set of leather-bound books stacked on a nearby table. Their covers were cracked and worn, but inside, the pages told a story of devotion warped into madness. The Reeds were not just a family, they were a cult unto themselves. Each entry described meticulous preparation, offerings, punishments, and ceremonies intended to strengthen the family's bond and purify those who trespassed. The words chilled him because they were written with clarity, pride, and a terrifying sense of inevitability. He reached the edge of the platform and noticed remnants of previous ceremonies, scorched candles, dried flowers, and ash scattered across the stone. Some items were unrecognizable, twisted beyond what nature intended. Jacob swallowed hard. The farm, the Reeds, the underground chamber, all of it was a system, a ritualized ecosystem where outsiders were either integrated, broken, or removed. A sudden creak echoed from above. Jacob froze. The attic above had seemed distant, but now he felt the presence of someone or something watching him, assessing him. And then, in a corner of the chamber, he saw it. A figure huddled in the shadows, rocking gently, eyes wide and unblinking. A survivor? Or someone already lost to the Reeds' obsession? His pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed to run, yet he knew he had gone too far. The truth was here, hidden beneath the farm, in symbols, cages, and the meticulous notes of a family obsessed with control. And the more Jacob understood, the more he felt the weight of their eyes upon him, waiting to decide his fate. Next, we discover the horrifying initiation the Reeds perform on outsiders who linger too long. Chapter 7. The Initiation. The underground chamber seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Jacob's heart thundered as he inched closer to the platform. Every shadow seemed to twitch, every whisper of air carrying a voice he couldn't quite hear. Then, from a narrow side passage, he saw them, 3 of the Reed family members emerging, faces grim, their movements deliberate and precise. At the center of the chamber, a young man, clearly a visitor, judging by his terrified eyes, was bound to the platform. The ropes cut into his skin, and his breath came in short, ragged gasps. Jacob's stomach churned as he realized the purpose of the symbols, the jars, the etched floors. They were all part of this ritual. The Reeds were preparing him for something, some initiation that Jacob could only guess at from the meticulous arrangements. The eldest Reed, a woman with piercing eyes and a presence that seemed to command the room itself, began speaking in low, measured tones. Jacob couldn't understand the words, but he could feel their weight, the way they sank into the bones of everyone present. The man on the platform flinched, and a sharp metallic scent filled the chamber. It was not blood yet, but the promise of it lingered, thick and suffocating. Jacob crouched behind a stack of crates, trying to remain unseen. He felt frozen by fear, yet drawn closer by morbid curiosity. The ritual was both terrifying and mesmerizing, each movement precise, almost reverent. The reeds weren't just cruel, they were methodical, treating each initiation like a sacred ceremony. A low hum rose from the corners of the chamber, vibrating through Jacob's chest. The symbols etched in the floor glowed faintly in the torchlight, as though responding to the family's words. The tension built to a pulse that made the air itself feel alive. Jacob realized that the farm was more than a home. It was a living altar, and the reeds were its devoted priests. Before he could process more, the young man on the platform let out a terrified scream. Jacob's stomach knotted. He knew that witnessing this was a risk. If the reeds discovered him, there would be no escape. Yet he couldn't tear his eyes away. The ritual was only beginning, and the horrifying truth about the reeds' obsession with family perfection was about to be revealed in full. Next, we discover the true purpose of the reeds' rituals and the terrifying fate of those who fail. Chapter 8. The Price of Failure. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as he watched the eldest reed circle the bound young man like a predator studying its prey. The man's wide eyes darted between Jacob's hiding spot and the reeds, pleading silently for mercy that would never come. The air itself seemed to tighten around Jacob, heavy with the metallic tang of fear and inevitability. The ritual intensified. Candles flickered in response to the eldest reed's words, their flames twisting unnaturally as if alive, casting grotesque shadows across the chamber. Each shadow seemed to lean closer, reaching for Jacob, even though he had hidden behind a stack of crates. The young man struggled against his restraints, but the ropes held firm, biting into his skin. Jacob's stomach churned as he saw the purpose of the ceremony. It wasn't merely about submission. The reeds were testing the boundaries of their victim's mind and body, extracting obedience, loyalty, and something darker. Failure was not an option, and those who faltered, who hesitated or resisted, paid a horrifying price. The eldest reed raised a carved dagger, its surface dull with age, and traced symbols in the air over the young man's chest. Jacob felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. The chanting grew louder, almost musical, but in a way that made his teeth ache. The symbols etched in the floor glimmered faintly, illuminating the young man's terrified face. Then came the first scream, a guttural, piercing sound that clawed at Jacob's eardrums and made the hair on his arms stand on end. The young man writhed violently as the ritual's final stage began. Every instinct screamed for Jacob to run, but he couldn't move, paralyzed by fear and fascination. He understood with a sickening clarity that this was the ultimate punishment for failure. The reed's obsession demanded perfection, and imperfection had a cost. As ritual reached its peak, the hum of the chamber deepened into a low, vibrating resonance that seemed to seep into Jacob's bones. The young man's body went still, and the eldest reed stepped back, surveying their work with a chilling calm. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive air heavy with the weight of the event that had just concluded. Jacob swallowed hard. This was no ordinary family. The reeds had turned obsession into an art form, fear into a tool, and cruelty into a ritual. And now, more than ever, Jacob realized the danger he was in. Next, we discover how the reeds' obsession began, and why outsiders like Jacob are never truly safe on this farm.
Did you know? In 1798, as Kentucky grew from frontier territory into a settled state, the legislature took a major step toward law and order by appointing commissioners to plan the first state penitentiary. This prison, located in Frankfort, was built to be the first in the region west of the Allegheny Mountains, and construction began right after the legislature chose a location in 1798. It was designed with strong walls and cells to securely hold inmates in a time when frontier justice was often chaotic and local communities struggled to maintain legal authority. This marked a shift from frontier settlements to structured government and more formal justice systems in the new state.
Chapter 9. The Roots of Darkness. Jacob crept through the chamber, careful not to disturb anything. His mind raced with questions. Why had the reeds become this way? How had a family once like any other descended into such obsession and cruelty? The answers lay somewhere in the farm itself, in the whispers and shadows that seemed to cling to the walls. Near the far corner, Jacob discovered a hidden drawer beneath the floorboards, its edges worn from years of use. Inside were journals, older than the ones in the attic, their pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was jagged, chaotic, as if written in moments of frenzy. He opened the first volume, and the room seemed to grow colder as he read the words that detailed the Reeds' origins. The story began in the late 1700s. The first Reed patriarch had arrived in Kentucky seeking fortune and isolation, but unlike his neighbors, he was obsessed with control, not just over land or livestock, but over life itself. Early entries described experiments on animals, first simple, then cruelly inventive, testing the limits of survival and obedience. Over generations, this obsession intensified, becoming a twisted family doctrine. Jacob read accounts of rituals designed to strengthen the family bond, notes on punishment and reward, and chilling advice on how to lure outsiders. It was clear the Reeds' obsession had been carefully cultivated for decades. It was not madness in a single generation. It was tradition, an inheritance of darkness passed from parent to child. The final pages were the most disturbing. They described the perfect family, one where blood, obedience, and fear were intertwined. Anyone who failed the family's expectations was marked, studied, and ultimately transformed or removed. There was no mercy, only the continuation of the Reeds' dark lineage. Jacob shivered, realizing that he was not just trespassing on a dangerous farm. He had stumbled into the culmination of generations of calculated cruelty. The house, the land, even the air itself was saturated with the Reeds' obsession. And now, with each passing moment, he was becoming a part of it, whether he wanted to or not. A faint scratching echoed from the passage above. Jacob's heart leapt. The Reeds were near, moving silently in the shadows, perhaps aware of his presence. He had uncovered the roots of their darkness, but the question remained, would he escape or become another chapter in their legacy? Next, we discover Jacob's first narrow escape, and the moment he realizes the Reeds are always watching. Chapter 10. Eyes in the Dark. Jacob's pulse raced as he crept back toward the hidden passage. The journals clutched tightly in his hands felt heavier with every step, as if the weight of generations of darkness pressed down on him. He had learned too much, seen too much, and he knew the Reeds would not let intruders leave unscathed. Every creak of the wooden floor above made his skin prickle. He paused, listening. From somewhere deep within the house came the faintest whisper, a low, deliberate hum that seemed to echo in every corner of the underground chamber. The Reeds were moving, always aware. Jacob realized with a sickening certainty that this farm had no blind spots. Every shadow, every beam of light was a part of their watchful gaze. He slid through the narrow passage, pressing his back against the cold, damp walls. The torchlight flickered, and for a moment he thought he saw shapes moving just out of reach, tiny, deliberate figures flitting through the dark. Fear surged, clawing at his chest, but so did determination. He had to get out. At the top of the spiral staircase, the attic seemed impossibly distant. The house was silent now, deceptively so, as if it were holding its breath. Jacob paused, straining to hear anything. Footsteps, whispers, the faintest rustle of movement. Nothing. He moved quickly, but the air grew heavier with each step, thick with a tension that made him dizzy. Then he heard it. A soft, deliberate click behind him. The hairs on his neck stood on end. Jacob spun, but the passage was empty, or so it seemed. In the shadows, a pair of eyes glinted faintly, unblinking, watching, always watching. Panic surged. He had underestimated the Reeds' presence. They were not just in the house. They were in the very walls, the air, the shadows. Jacob bolted. The attic door loomed ahead, and with a desperate shove, he pushed it open. Light from a small, grimy window illuminated the dust-choked room. He thought he was safe. But from the corner of his eye, a figure slipped behind the shadows of the beams, silent, patient, and relentless. The Reeds were always one step ahead. He had escaped the underground chamber, but escaping the Reeds themselves, that was a different matter entirely. Next, we discover the first true confrontation between Jacob and the Reeds, where escape may no longer be an option. Chapter 11. The Family's Shadow. Jacob froze as a floorboard creaked behind him. His heart slammed against his ribs. He had thought he was alone in the attic, but the sudden presence of someone, or something, made the air constrict around him. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was one of the Reed children, tall for their age, eyes sharp and unreadable, moving with unnatural precision. The child tilted their head, studying Jacob as though weighing his worth. There was no malice in the gaze, yet no mercy either. It was a calm, calculating observation that made his blood run cold. Jacob swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed for him to run, but he had learned something in the underground chamber. The Reeds weren't ordinary. They didn't act out of impulse. They acted as if the farm itself moved them, a living extension of their will. Suddenly, a sound from the floor below made him flinch. The eldest Reed appeared at the attic doorway, tall and imposing, their presence filling the room with an almost tangible gravity. "You shouldn't be here," they said softly, voice smooth but edged with steel. "Curiosity has a cost." Jacob's stomach twisted. He tried to speak, to explain himself, but no words came. Every escape route felt impossible. The house itself seemed to lean inward, trapping him. He realized then that the Reeds didn't need to chase him. They could corner him with their presence alone, making him feel the weight of inevitability pressing down from every shadow. The eldest Reed stepped closer, the soft scrape of their boots echoing ominously. Jacob noticed a subtle shift in the room, shadows bending toward them, the hum of the walls rising into a resonant vibration. The child from earlier moved silently to flank the doorway, cutting off any thought of retreat. Jacob's mind raced. He had survived the attic, the hidden chamber, and the underground passage, but now the Reeds themselves were here, in the room, close enough to feel their gaze on every nerve. The air was thick with anticipation, a tension so sharp it seemed to slice the silence into pieces. He realized the truth. The Reeds didn't merely inhabit the farm, they owned it, body and soul. Anyone who entered became part of the web they had spun over generations, and escape was no longer a question of speed, but of cunning and luck. Next, we discover Jacob's desperate attempt to outsmart the Reeds and the horrifying trap that awaits him. Chapter 12. The Trap Unfolds. Jacob's mind raced as he backed toward the attic window, searching for any way out. His hands shook, heart hammering with a mix of fear and determination. The child's eyes followed his every move, unblinking and calculating. The eldest Reed's calm presence pressed down on him, a silent force that seemed to tighten the very air around his chest. He dove for the window, yanking it open. The small ledge overlooked the overgrown yard below. Moonlight glinted off the wet grass, giving the farm an otherworldly sheen. Freedom seemed tantalizingly close, just one leap away, but instinct screamed that the Reeds had anticipated this. Before he could climb out, a soft whisper curled around his ear, unintelligible yet terrifyingly intimate. Jacob froze. Shadows shifted in the corners of the attic, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. The child stepped forward, tilting their head, and a faint smile brushed their lips. Jacob's stomach turned cold. The trap wasn't physical. It was psychological. Every step, every breath was being watched, guided, manipulated. He leapt anyway, landing hard on the damp grass below. Pain shot up his leg, but he forced himself to run. The farm seemed endless, the paths twisting unnaturally. Trees loomed like sentinels, the cornfields whispering secrets he couldn't understand. Every instinct told him he was being funneled, led by invisible hands. Then he stumbled into a clearing he hadn't noticed before. In the center lay a pit, its edges lined with freshly turned soil. Shadows coiled around it, and Jacob realized with horror that it was not empty. The remnants of the Reeds' past victims were here, a collection of bones, tattered clothing, and objects that hinted at lives abruptly ended. His stomach lurched. This was the true heart of the farm's darkness, a place where curiosity met inevitability. Footsteps approached Behi and him. He spun, heart in his throat. The child and the eldest Reed had followed. There was no shouting, no running chase, just calm, deliberate pursuit, as if the farm itself had opened its arms to trap him. Jacob's mind screamed for escape, but the pit, the shadows, and the Reed's eyes made it clear. Running alone was not enough. Next, we discover Jacob's shocking realization of the farm's true power and the horrifying connection between the Reeds and the land itself. Chapter 13. Roots of the Curse. Jacob crouched at the edge of the pit, his eyes tracing the twisted shapes in the shadows. Bones, broken tools, and tattered remnants of clothing hinted at lives snuffed out quietly, methodically. But something deeper stirred in the soil itself. The earth seemed to pulse, almost breathe, as if the farm was alive in a way that defied reason. As he stepped closer, he noticed faint markings etched into the ground, symbols older than the Reed's journals, carved deep into the roots of ancient oaks that surrounded the clearing. His torchlight flickered over the carvings, revealing sigils that pulsed faintly, almost in response to his presence. These were not the work of mere humans. They were something older, something darker. He realized with a chill that the Reeds' obsession had not started with them. The farm itself had long been steeped in darkness, bound by generations of ritual, obsession, and blood. The Reeds were merely its latest caretakers, feeding a power older than anyone alive in Kentucky. The more he looked, the more he understood. The farm demanded sacrifice, devotion, and control, and the Reeds had learned to obey it, molding their lives and everyone who trespassed to its will. A sudden rustle behind him made Jacob spin. The eldest Reed stepped into the clearing, their presence calm, almost patient, but unbearably heavy. "Do you see it now?" they asked, voice low, echoing with something unspoken. "This land chooses its own." Jacob swallowed hard, fear gnawing at his insides. Every step he had taken, every choice he had made, had been within the farm's design. It had led him here, to the heart of its power, and now he understood why escape was never truly an option. The Reeds were not the only danger. They were the farm's enforcers, extensions of its dark will. A sudden breeze stirred the pit, and Jacob saw movement in the oil. Roots twisted unnaturally as though alive, reaching toward the remains below. The farm itself seemed to pulse, drawing life from the past, feeding on memory and fear. The Reeds knelt briefly, whispering words in a language that made Jacob's skin crawl, before standing and facing him with intent. Jacob realized the horrifying truth. The Reeds were not simply a family. They were the farm incarnate. Their obsession, cruelty, and rituals were merely the outward manifestation of a force that had existed long before them. And now, that force had claimed his presence as its next chapter. Next, we discover Jacob's desperate gamble to turn the farm's power against the Reeds, and whether it can save him. Chapter 14. Turning the Shadows. Jacob's mind raced as he crouched near the pit, staring at the pulsing roots and symbols in the earth. The Reeds had underestimated one thing. Fear, combined with desperation, could be a weapon. He had seen the patterns in their rituals, the way the farm responded to their presence. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could manipulate it against them. He studied the sigils carved into the soil, noting the faint glow that pulsed with each whispered word of the Reeds. Light from his torch danced over the markings, and he realized that the symbols were not static. They responded to energy, intent, and presence. Jacob's pulse quickened. If he could channel his will, his fear, and his desire to survive, maybe he could make the land rebel against its masters, even if only for a moment. The eldest Reed approached, their eyes narrowing, sensing the shift in the air. The child from the attic stood silently by, watching, almost as if calculating his every heartbeat. Jacob's hands shook, but he forced himself to focus. Slowly he began tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick, improvising based on the symbols he had memorized from the journals. The ground reacted immediately. Roots twitched, the hum of the farm rose, resonating through his bones. Candles from the hidden chamber flickered above as if drawn by the energy. The reeds stopped, momentarily caught off guard. Their calm expressions faltered, replaced by surprise, an emotion Jacob had never thought they could show. He pushed harder, concentrating, letting every ounce of fear and desperation flow into the ritual. The shadows shifted violently, slithering toward the reeds, coiling and twisting around them. The eldest reed stepped back, clearly unsettled, their voice cutting through the chaos. "You dare?" Jacob didn't answer. He continued his improvised ritual, feeling the land's power resonate with him. Roots rose from the pit, crawling across the ground, wrapping around crates and objects, threatening to entangle everything in the chamber. The reeds' control faltered, their calm authority shaken for the first time. But it was not enough. The farm responded to him partially, unpredictably, and Jacob knew the reeds had anticipated resistance. He had only bought himself moments, not freedom. The child's eyes narrowed, and a faint, knowing smile curved their lips, signaling that this battle was far from over. Next, we discover the reeds' counterattack and Jacob's narrow escape through the depths of the farm. Chapter 15. The reeds' counterstrike. Jacob's heart pounded as he stumbled back from the thrashing roots, sweat and dirt streaking his face. The fleeting advantage he had seized with the improvised ritual was slipping away. Shadows twisted violently, retreating from his influence and coalescing around the reeds like living armor. The farm itself seemed to recoil, responding to the family's will as if they were the heartbeat of the land. The eldest reed's eyes blazed with intensity. "Fool!" they hissed, voice low and sharp, cutting through the heavy air. "You think you can play with forces older than you?" With a subtle gesture, the shadows lunged forward. Roots shot from the pit, snaking across the floor toward Jacob, gripping at his legs, anchoring him. Panic surged, sharp and cold, as he realized the reeds were not merely defending, they were attacking, controlling the farm with precision. The child from the attic stepped closer, their gaze cold and calculating. Jacob saw a flash of something unsettling, delight. It was a predator testing its prey, savoring every heartbeat of fear. Jacob swung his torch wildly, but the shadows twisted away, as if mocking him. Each movement drew him deeper into the chamber, toward the pit, where the remains of past victims seemed to loom like silent warnings. Breathing heavily, Jacob knew he had seconds to act. The improvised symbols he had traced on the ground offered only partial resistance. The reed's centuries of accumulated knowledge of the farm far outmatched his desperate improvisation. A sudden motion from the eldest reed sent him sprawling, the torch skittering across the dirt floor, flickering out, plunging the room into darkness. Fear clawed at Jacob's mind, but instinct screamed survival. He leapt, rolling past the writhing roots, and scrambled toward a narrow side passage he had noticed earlier. The shadows followed, writhing, tugging at his clothes, his hair, his very skin. A faint laugh echoed from the child, high-pitched and eerie, promising retribution for his audacity. Jacob dove into the passage, walls scraping against him, roots clawing at his heels. He didn't dare look back, knowing that the reeds were following, their control over the farm nearly absolute. Every step felt like a descent deeper into the bowels of the farm, where freedom was uncertain and the consequences of failure final. Next, we discover the final layer of the farm's horrors, and Jacob's shocking realization about what the reeds truly want. Chapter 16. The Heart of the Farm. Jacob's hands scraped against the rough walls of the narrow passage as he fled deeper into the farm's underbelly. The shadows still writhed behind him, moving with intent, as if the land itself remembered every step of the reed's ancestors. The air was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of earth and the lingering scent of ritual pressing down on him with every heartbeat. He emerged into a vast underground chamber unlike anything he had seen before. The walls were carved with elaborate patterns, older and more intricate than any symbols in the journals. They pulsed faintly with a soft, unnatural light, illuminating the floor, which was covered with concentric circles of dirt, roots, and ashes. Jacob felt his chest tighten. The place itself seemed to breathe, alive with the reed's obsession and the farm's ancient hunger. At the center of the chamber was a stone altar, worn smooth from centuries of use. On it lay objects both human and animal, carefully arranged in macabre symmetry. And then he saw it. A portrait-like carving in the stone itself, depicting the Reeds, not merely as a family, but fused with the land. Trees sprouted from their limbs, shadows flowed from their eyes, and roots entwined their bodies. Jacob realized the horrifying truth. The Reeds were not only caretakers of the farm, they had become one with it, vessels for its ancient, dark will. The eldest Reed appeared at the chamber entrance, their silhouette bathed in the eerie glow. "Do you understand now?" they asked softly, eyes like molten steel. "We are not just family. We are the farm, and the farm demands loyalty, devotion, and sacrifice." Jacob stumbled back, terror clawing at his mind. Every disappearance, every ritual, every hidden chamber he had discovered. The Reeds had orchestrated it all to preserve and empower themselves. The victims, the cages, the underground chambers, they were part of a system, a cycle feeding the land's hunger and binding the family to its dark roots. A low hum rose from the walls, vibrating through Jacob's body. The shadows twisted around the Reeds, protective and alive, responding to their every thought. Jacob understood with gut-wrenching clarity that escape was no longer about avoiding them. It was about surviving the farm itself. He backed away toward the narrow passage he had entered, but the eldest Reed raised a hand, and the shadows shifted, cutting off his exit. Jacob's mind raced for a solution. He had glimpsed the farm's power, but now he realized the full cost of defiance. The Reeds did not merely punish. They integrated the unworthy into the cycle, ensuring the land's hunger continued. Next, we discover Jacob's desperate final plan to survive, and whether he can escape the Reeds' unrelenting grasp. Chapter 17. A desperate gamble. Jacob crouched in the shadows of the central chamber, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed for him to flee, but escape wasn't enough. The farm itself, fused with the Reeds, was alive, watching, calculating. He had learned enough to know one thing: brute force wouldn't work. He needed cunning, timing, and a risk so bold it could either free him or doom him entirely. His eyes darted across the chamber. The carvings, symbols, and roots pulsing in response to the Reeds' presence were his only chance. If he could redirect the energy, provoke the shadows to respond to him rather than the family, he might create a window, just long enough to slip through. Every flicker of torchlight, every hum in the walls, told him how delicate the balance was. One misstep, and the land would crush him instantly. The eldest Reed's eyes bore into him, unyielding, as they and the child circled closer. Jacob took a deep breath and began tracing improvised sigils on the dirt floor, whispering words he didn't fully understand, relying on memory from the journals. His pulse synced with the vibrations in the ground, the very heartbeat of the farm. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, the shadows wavered, flickering between the Reeds and Jacob. The roots twisted, hesitating. The hum rose in intensity, a strange resonance that made his bones vibrate. For a moment, he dared to hope. The child's gaze sharpened. The eldest Reed's voice sliced through the chamber. "Foolish mortal, you cannot command what is older than you." Shadows lunged, faster than his mind could track. Jacob rolled, barely avoiding grasping tendrils of root that thrashed across the floor. He pushed harder, pouring fear, will, and desperation into the symbols he traced. A shockwave of energy rippled through the chamber, sending loose jars clattering, candles toppling, and roots recoiling. Reeds faltered, just for a heartbeat. That was all Jacob needed. He scrambled toward the side passage, ignoring the sharp pain in his legs as the roots whipped at him. The chamber roared around him, alive and furious, as the farm reacted violently to his attempt at defiance. The Reeds shouted, a sharp, unified sound that seemed to clash with the vibrating hum of the land itself. Jacob dove into the narrow passage, tumbling into darkness, the sound of movement, whispers, and shadows pursuing him. He didn't know if he would survive, but for the first time, he felt he might have a chance. The farm's power was immense, but even it could be manipulated, even if only just enough to slip through the Reeds' grasp. Next, we discover Jacob's perilous path through the farm's deepest corridors, where the final secrets await. Chapter 18. The Farm's Labyrinth. Jacob stumbled through the narrow passage, heart hammering, the shadows from above twisting and stretching like living things. The air was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of earth and the faint, lingering scent of the reeds' rituals. Every step felt as though the farm itself was reshaping around him, walls narrowing, roots writhing, as if guiding him deeper into its dark heart. The tunnel opened into a vast labyrinth, carved into the very soil beneath the farm. Low ceilings dripped with condensation, and faint whispers echoed from every corner, seemingly coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Jacob realized with a sinking dread that he was not merely underground. He was inside the farm itself, a living maze designed to disorient, terrify, and trap intruders. He moved cautiously, trying to memorize the twists and turns, but the layout was shifting subtly, almost imperceptibly. Roots snaked across the floor, blocking passages, while the walls seemed to lean inward. Shadows flickered unnaturally, stretching toward him and receding, playing tricks on his mind. Every instinct screamed to run, but the deeper he went, the more he felt the farm's pulse in his chest. Then he saw it. A chamber at the center of the labyrinth, illuminated by an eerie greenish glow. Jacob's stomach tightened. The room was filled with remnants of the past. Cages, broken tools, jars filled with preserved specimens, and at the center, a massive root, coiled like a serpent, pulsing with life. The roots seemed almost sentient, entwining around objects as if protecting them. Jacob stepped closer and noticed carvings along the root itself. Symbols like those in the journals, but older, more intricate, alive with energy. He understood at last. This was the heart of the farm, the source of the reeds' unnatural power. The land had been feeding on devotion, fear, a shield, and sacrifice for centuries, shaping the family and their rituals to maintain its dark will. A whisper curled around him from the shadows, soft but undeniable. "You cannot leave," it breathed. Jacob's pulse raced. The reeds had not needed to chase him. They had created this labyrinth to ensure that the farm itself would defend them. The realization was chilling. Survival depended not just on speed, but on understanding the living, breathing darkness around him. Next, we discover Jacob's confrontation with the heart of the farm and the shocking revelation that could change everything. Chapter 19. The Heart Revealed. Jacob's hands trembled as he stepped into the central chamber of the labyrinth. The massive root pulsated with an eerie, almost sentient rhythm, sending vibrations through the floor and into his bones. The air shimmered with energy, thick and oppressive, as though the farm itself had a consciousness and was aware of his presence. Every instinct screamed for him to turn back, but curiosity and desperation pushed him forward. The carvings along the central root glowed faintly in the torchlight, revealing faces, twisted, familiar, and yet impossible. They were the reeds' ancestors, each one etched into the root as though absorbed into the land itself. Jacob's breath caught. He realized with chilling clarity that the reeds had not merely lived on the farm, they had become part of it, their life force intertwined with the land for generations. The eldest reed emerged from the shadows, flanked by the child, both moving silently, their presence merging with the room's unnatural energy. "Do you see it now?" the elder whispered, voice echoing as though carried by the root itself. "This is why the family survives. This is why the farm endures. Every sacrifice, every ritual, every life. It sustains us." Jacob's mind raced. The jars, the cages, the underground chambers, all of it fed this heart. The reeds were not merely cruel, they were guardians, or perhaps slaves of the land's ancient hunger, and anyone who trespassed, anyone who resisted, became fodder for its power, adding to the cycle. A sudden motion made Jacob stagger back. The root writhed, curling like a living serpent, responding to the reed's whispered commands. The child raised a hand, and the shadows surged, snaking along the walls. Jacob realized with horror, escape would not be a matter of running. It would require outsmarting the farm itself. The eldest reed smiled, a faint, knowing curve of the lips. "You cannot fight what you do not understand," they said softly. Jacob swallowed hard. The secret was clear now. The reeds' true power came not from themselves, but from centuries of devotion, blood, and fear bound into the farm. To leave, he would need to confront the heart directly and gamble everything he had. Next, we discover Jacob's final confrontation and the desperate gamble that will determine if he survives or becomes part of the farm forever. Chapter 20. Breaking the Cycle. Jacob's breath came in ragged gasps as he stood before the massive pulsing root, the living heart of the farm. The carvings of generations of reeds glimmered in the dim light, their faces twisted in eternal devotion to the land. The air thrummed with power, vibrating through his bones, a constant reminder that the farm itself was alive and aware. The eldest reed stepped closer, the child flanking them, both moving with unnatural precision. "This is your choice," the elder said softly, voice echoing like the whisper of the soil itself. "Submit and join the cycle, or fight and be consumed." Jacob's hands shook, but he forced himself to focus. The journals had shown him patterns, weak points in the rituals, flaws in the way the reed's power flowed through the land. If he could disrupt the cycle, even briefly, he might escape. Every instinct screamed fear, but desperation fueled him. He traced improvised symbols in the dirt around the root, repeating the phrases he had memorized from the oldest journal. The air stiffened, shadows coiling, roots thrashing. The reed's calm expressions faltered as the pulses of the farm wavered, responding partially to Jacob's will. For the first time, the dominance of the land seemed uncertain. The child hissed, a sharp sound of frustration. The eldest reed raised their hand, and the shadows surged toward Jacob, faster and stronger than ever. Pain lanced through his legs as the roots lashed at him, but he kept moving, keeping the symbols intact, keeping the energy flowing. Then, with a sudden desperate motion, Jacob flipped a jar of murky liquid he had grabbed earlier, spilling its contents over the central root. The pulse of the farm stuttered violently. The carvings glowed brighter, then dimmed. The shadows screamed, writhing, confused, as the reeds shouted in unison, their voices cracking for the fur. "It's time." Jacob seized the moment. He bolted for the narrow passage, the walls and roots convulsing behind him. The labyrinth twisted unnaturally, trying to trap him, but the disruption had bought him precious seconds. He scrambled through the tunnels, lungs burning, legs shaking, never daring to look back. Finally, he emerged into the yard, gasping in the night air. The farmhouse loomed behind him, silent now, shadows receding into the walls. The pulse of the land had diminished, though he knew it was not gone. The reeds remained, powerful, patient, and alive in ways that could not be destroyed. But Jacob had survived. He didn't stop running. He didn't look back. The farm had tried to claim him, and almost had. But for now, he had broken free. Outside, the night was cold, silent, and real. The land behind him throbbed faintly, a reminder that the horror of the reeds and their dark legacy was never far away. The cycle may continue, and the farm still hungers. But one man had walked through its heart and lived, if only to remember and warn the next unwary soul